Good morning and welcome to our final edition of A View from the House this week. Today we look at this week's questions in the National Assembly. We have an ANC question to Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe on the separation of powers between the three arms of state. And there is a question to the Justice and Constitutional Development Minister, Jeff Radebe, about the constitutional and judicial review. Our final question this morning is to the Minister of Police, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, about police officers being promoted while being investigated for wrongdoings. Our first question comes from Mr. Letsau Diale of the African National Congress and deals with an issue that's currently in the news, namely the separation of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial arms of the state. He asked the Deputy President what the key responsibility was of these three institutions in leading the transformation to achieve the vision of a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and just society. Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe said the Constitution stated quite clearly that the transformation of society was not only a political ideal, but also a constitutional injunction for people both inside and outside Parliament.
Failure by any of the three arms of the state to pursue the noble goal of transforming our society into a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, equal, and just society would simply be against the letter and spirit of our Constitution. The bottom line is this: it is the shared responsibility of all three arms of the state to work tirelessly for the advancement of the political, social, and economic rights of all our people as enshrined in our Constitution.
Deputy President Motlanthe said Section 27 of the Constitution also stated that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures to achieve the progressive realization of each of the citizens' rights enshrined in the Constitution. He said through the realization of these rights, true transformation will be achieved. In a supplementary question, Mr. Diale said the ANC had been at the forefront of guiding the nation in the key challenges facing a new democracy that needed to transform the arms of the state.
Would he agree that it is this leadership of the ANC that has ensured the separation of powers, a functioning executive and vibrant legislative arm, together with independence or judiciary, and the rule of law as foundational values that underpin the democratic society?
Yes, indeed, honorable members, I do agree with Honorable Diale that the African National Congress has been playing a central role in upholding the Constitution of the Republic, as well as adhering to the separation and respecting the separation of powers and the rule of law.
Members of opposition parties were still not convinced that government was playing open cards with the issue of constitutional reform.
Currently, there is an issue about the transformation and the review of the Constitution. And I'm asking, is it your considered view that the Constitution as it stands today is still correct? There's nothing wrong with the Constitution, with the powers that are assigned to various executives?
Well, quite frankly, I'm not aware of any talk of reviewing the Constitution. I'm only aware of what the Minister of Justice communicated yesterday, which is reviewing the judgments of the Constitutional Court. But reviewing the Constitution, I'm not aware of that at all. And I think the Constitution remains the supreme law of our land, and we all owe allegiance to it. Thank you.
One wonder about this type of questions, and obviously one needs to get the type of platitude in answer that the question deserves. But if we move away from the platitude, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, The question that I want to put to you is about the culture of democracy. We know what the Constitution states, we know the basics of constitutionalism, or we should. But the culture of constitutionalism, how do we promote that, and how do we prevent the Minister of Justice from issuing a discussion document in which he, as an executive policy, speaks about judicial restraints, which is a shock to anyone who understands constitutionalism? How do we prevent the same Minister of Justice from discussing a scorecard on the activities of the Constitutional Court? Because that is what actually means. How do we prevent this type of constitutional deviation in the mindset when the President here thinks that we can even talk about a media tribunal? How do we deal with issues like the banning of the Dalai Lama? Somebody's chirping in the background. How do we justify the fact that tomorrow morning myself and the Speaker are going to be locked in a courtroom? Myself personally, the Speaker, through a contingent of 3 lawyers flown in from Johannesburg, to reinstate the right of members of parliament here to introduce legislation which each and every democratic parliament has, and which our constitution gives, and which our rules have taken away.
Culture, by definition, is a historical phenomenon. And therefore, the culture of constitutionalism will also be a historical phenomenon. There's only one way of entrenching in constitutionalism. It is by education, practice, and drawing the requisite lessons from how we experience the Constitution itself. And sometimes that will happen in a way of contestation and so on. We shouldn't be alarmed by that. As long as we do that within the framework of the Constitution, and that leads to a better understanding and grasp of constitutionalism, that culture will then take root. But if we emphasize prevention, don't, then the Constitution will only be understood by the privileged few. But we want it to be rooted. We must create an environment in which it can be debated and understood, because it is through that kind of education, practically, that it will be able to be rooted in the hearts and minds of our people. Thank you.
The parliamentary leader of the Democratic Alliance, Ms. Lindiwe Mazibuko, also sought more clarity from the Deputy President.
Mr. Speaker, the discussion document which was released by the Honourable Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development yesterday noted that the reasons for the assessment of the Constitutional Court's rulings was to evaluate the Court's decisions against a desired transformation landscape. In fact, Minister Kgadebe's statement yesterday further confirmed our fears in the Democratic Alliance that the government wishes to co-opt the judiciary into its political policy program through the mechanism of cooperative governance. Constitutionally, cooperative governance is limited to the 3 spheres of government: local government, provincial government, and national. And the judiciary should be left to interpret the law free from any political interference. My question, Mr. Speaker, is this the purpose of the review? Is the purpose of the review to render the judiciary an extension of the executive arm of government? And if so, how does the government reconcile this with the constitutionally enshrined principle of the separation of powers?
No, that is not the intention. That is not the purpose of the review. But I'm sure Minister Kgadebe would be able to answer that question, because the separation of powers is what we accept, that the 3 arms of the state have separate powers, have to work in a cooperative fashion, that independent of each other, in a manner that enhances and consolidates our democracy. and none of these three is superior to the others. These are equal arms of the state. The practice of constitutional review only serves to ensure that we comply with the Constitution, the prescripts of the Constitution. Parliament in legislating should comply. The executive in adopting policy, major policy, and so should also comply. And that is the responsibility that is given to the judiciary. It does not therefore make them more senior or stronger or more powerful than the other two. If, as legislators, we craft legislation with the understanding that it must be within the framework of the Constitution, the Constitutional Court would not have the need to pronounce on that at all. It will simply certify that, yes, indeed, this is in line with the Constitution. If, as the executive, we take a major policy decision, we ought to ourselves take the trouble to ensure that it complies with the Constitution. So the separation of powers are very clear. They should not be blurred. We have no intention of doing so.
We have a question on a related topic from Ms. Mazubuko to the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development coming up after the break. Stay with us.